Welcome back, guys. So this is our next tutorial for the Cypress automation. So in this lecture, we will start with the Cypress framework creation using the best practices that is provided by the Cypress. So we'll start with the topics one by one. At the end, we will create the complete framework with all the best practices and the required data that is required for the framework creation. So in this lecture, basically, we will discuss the setting up the test hooks, what are the hooks and their uses, and then we will see the data-driven testing using the fixtures. So first, start with the hooks. I will understand the scenario that I am doing for this lecture. So in this, here the site reddit.com register me email ID. I'm using that opening this site, and that I'm typing my first name and the email ID. It is similar to that. That is the page, and I'm typing full name and the Reddit mail ID. That scenario we will first try with the hooks, and then we will pass that data using the fixture file. So what are the hooks basically? So if you open the Cypress official website and search for the hooks, so then you are able to see these are the Cypress hooks that is provided by the Cypress, and that is borrowed from the Mocha. So these are all the hooks is basically provided by the Mocha framework, and because the Cypress is supporting that Mocha framework, so we can use that hooks directly. The hooks basically is kind of a method using that we can set some preconditions, like while opening the before running a test you want to open the browser and want to set some conditions, or you want to load your test data, and after completing the test you want to run some tear down methods, or want to do some action that is performed after the test execution. These all the method we can perform using the Cypress hooks. It's a similar way to the test ng. If you are aware of the concept of the test ng, we have the method called before test, after test, before shoot, after shoot. Similar way, we have the hooks in the Cypress to perform these types of the preconditions. So we have four types of the hooks. One is the before, after, before each, and after each. Before basically it runs once before all the test cases in the block. Suppose inside one describe you have three or four it means the three or four test cases. It will run once only for all the test cases, and similar way after will run once after all the test cases. Suppose you have the multiple test cases and you want one precondition, and after one tear down method, then you can use before and after. For before each and after each, it will run before each test cases in the block, and the after each will run after each test cases in the block. So for if you want for every test cases you want some precondition, then you can use before each and after each. So that these are the four hooks that is provided by the Cypress to perform the condition after, before each, and after each. So if you back to our scenario, in this scenario basically we are opening this website and we are just identifying this text box and typing Vivek, and then we are typing this email ID as a VIV123. But this data is hard coded. So suppose in the test case, the real-time framework, we not want to test this test cases with the hard-coded value or the single value. In the real time, we want to perform this test cases with the multiple set of the values. So in that case, we have to map this data from the data file, and then data file, using that data file, we can map that data. So for that, if you aware or if you remember my previous lecture, in that I will explain that in the Cypress we have one folder called fixtures. Inside this fixture that is used for the handling the text data. So inside the fixture we have one file called example.json, or we can create the multiple text file according to our test data. So inside the test data we can define the whatever the data is required for our test cases, and we can link that test file to our test cases, and then we can use it directly. And how we can do that? So then we and to map this example.json to our test cases, that we will see. Basically, for that we require two set of data. One is the first name, and second one is this email ID. Open this example.json file. It's empty now. So first we have to create the test data. It's a plain JSON format, so we have to define like name and then colon, and then we can say name as Vivek, and then comma. And the second one is email. You can say is email colon, and email is VIV123. Similar. Okay. So now our test data is ready. we require only two dash data. One is the first name, second one is the email ID, and that data we have created in our example.json file here. Now the target question is how we can link this example.json file to our test.js, because the end of test case is here and we want to use this test data in this test cases. To use that, here we can use the fixtures concept, hooks concept, sorry, that we are discussing here. So inside the, if you remember, we have four hooks: before, after, before each, and after each. And before running all the test cases, we want our test cases, test data to be loaded. First, we want to load our test data, and then we want to use the test data to run our test cases. So for that, we can use the before hooks simply, because we want to load the data before test case execution. So what, just need to copy this before hooks and paste it here, this guy. That's all. So now whatever the code we will return inside that before hooks, it will execute before the test case execution. Then only we will start the test case execution. So we will load our test case test data that is available in this example.json file using this before hooks, and that test data we will use instead of this hard coded variable, that is Vivek or VIV123. To load the test data from this example.json file, we have one method in the Cypress. For that, we have cy.fixture method. Fixture method is available in the Cypress to load whatever the data is available inside the fixtures folder to our test cases. If you define the test data inside the fixture folder, you can use cy.fixture method to use this particular test file in your test cases directly. We can use cy.fixture. Inside the bracket, we have to pass the file name. In our case, file name is example.json, so we just need to pass example. That's all. This method will load the file and return the promise. To handle the promise in the Cypress, we already aware we have one method called then. Then we have to write then, and then we have to define a function. That is the syntax for the cy.fixture method that is available in the Cypress website. Data. So what we have did, we called cy.fixture method and defined the example.json file, and then we have resolved the promise, and whatever the data that is coming from that particular file, we have loaded into this data variable. So whatever the variable like name and the email ID, both the value will come inside this data variable. Now we will load this data variable value to our some local variable, and then we can use this local variable to our text case. For the creating the local variable, we know the one method is called this. We can simply say this dot data equal to data. This data one is the data that is coming from the example.json file, and this dot data is our local variable. So both the variables are basically different. So this dot data is our local variable that contains all the data, and this data we are using in the cy.fixture method to load the data from the example.json. That's all. Using this one line of code, if we run this test cases, that will load all the data from the example.json file and store in the this.data variable. Now we can use this data into our test cases. For that, basically, there's the cy.get command. Inside of that, if you open the example.json file, the name is name, and for the email ID, the name is email. So we can simply go to our test cases, just remove this hard-coded value, and we can say this dot data, that is our local variable, and then we can say dot name. That's all. It will go to load the data, and from this dot data we require only the name value for this field. For the second field we require the email ID. Then we can say this dot data dot email. That's email. I think this spelling is yes, email. That's all. So we have created the example.json file with the data, name, and email ID. Inside the test, we have used the hooks, that is before hooks, that will run the precondition before the test case execution. And then this we use the cy.fixture method define the file name, and then resolve the promise and store the data into the global variable, and then we convert this variable to the local variable, and inside that we can simply type this dot data dot name and this dot data dot email id. So the data whatever we are using from the example.json, it will load this to this particular test cases, and it will type the data into this website. Let's run this test case and see what's happening. So it say that cannot read the property of the name undefined. So I think we have not saved that example.json. Example, yes. So we are getting this error. So if you just check the code, I just missed the one bracket, so that it block will come inside the describe only. Then only we can use this global variable. If we define outside, then it will take say like this dot data is not defined. So just a small mistake. Just cut the bracket and press Control S. Now it will execute the test cases, and you are able to see like it will type the full name and the Reddit mail ID is a VIB123. So whatever we discussed, like setting up the test hooks, we have the four types of the hook: before, after, before each, and the after each. And then we will see the data driven testing within the fixture files. For that fact, we have to create the fixture inside the example.json folder, and then we have to use the hooks based on the requirement before or before each anything, and then we can use the cy.fixture method, then load the example file, that is the file name example.json, then resolve the promise, store the data into global variable, and then convert it to the local variable, and then we can use this dot data dot name and this dot data dot email id. So these are the code that is required for the setting of the hooks and for the data driven testing using the from the fixtures file. So that's all from this lecture. So if you have any questions or doubt, you can reach out to me on the LinkedIn. My LinkedIn URL is given in the description box. Next, in the next lecture, we will discuss the few more topics for the framework creation and create the framework completely using the Cypress best practice. So that's all. That's from the lecture. Thank you. Thanks for your time.